I'm here to debate about the topics of climate change, how it affects our communities, how it gets into our waterways and our air, and also about how do we deal with it as a society and what direction should we pursue in solving these issues. To start with climate change. What is climate change? Climate change um, is basically a very human man-made thing that is happening all across the world. It's primarily produced from fossil fuel companies or fossil fuels, for carbon dioxide released into our atmosphere, and that's causing a huge issue worldwide, and it's rapidly increasing our global temperatures that we've never seen before at an alarming rate and a quick rate over the past 250 years as well. And what the problem with that is, well, not only is that increasing our making a living harder as well, but it also affects minorities people. It affects people who are poor, it affects people who are elderly, people who are less fortunate as well, or it affects ethnic minorities, as I said. And particularly, when fossil fuel companies back in the day, back at least in the United States in particular, had less environmental regulation. So they would just dump stuff. They would either dump toxins into our waters, or they bury it in their ground, or they put it in the air, and there was no regulations for that. So it created these toxic communities, as seen from Toxic Communities, the book. One of the first topics of it, in the creation of environmental justice, is that the topics of how many ethnic minority communities, black communities, people of color, and those communities in the United States in particular are drastically affected from fossil fuel companies, either from because those people typically either but are particularly affected because of where the location of their neighborhoods are to relations to those said fossil fuel companies. One great example of is like Baltimore, or a particular protection is like in industrial cities like Detroit, whatever it is, where in you see this in Pello's argument of the four pillars. They institutionally had created a racial dynamic where people of color or were the ones that were seen as they were animals, or they were seen as inhuman, and that the people, the majority, or the white majority, or the whites that were in these cities, would abuse them, would even resort to violence, or would cause lethal force as well to maintain this control. And another means of control was through fossil fuels, where if you're producing, you build, fossil fuel plants in the area, you make these people sick. You got ammonia in the air, and a lot of times that causes long-term sicknesses, as well. Since they're seen as, inferior or as inhuman, there's less care by people in power about these people, and that has affected thousands of millions of Americans for the past 50 years. Another example is even in Flint, Michigan, where Flint, Michigan had as a large black community in Flint, Michigan, and when the city switched over water because they were economically in a tough position, the lack of response from the lead poisoning was slow. And it's very much arguable that that is a sign of environmental justice, because these people were affected for a long time, and yet the government didn't care enough to do it, likely because it had a large black community, and that's compared to a rich white neighborhood. Likely that does not happen because they just don't want it. They don't think so. And so the question also arises: why don't people move? Why don't people can? And that's primarily because, again, a large portion of minorities in America are often in a economically are poorer off, unfortunately, or that they live in this area that they love, in this area that they don't want to leave, and that they will fight to protect their land and protect their health overall as well. So that brings the question of, this is happening still in America, or just happening still around the world. How do we act on it? What do we do to better our lives? And the question is, what means do we go to do that? How far do we go to that? Andreas Malman in the Berliner, if you want to see that as well, citations will be below, quotes the idea of violence, and not person-to-person violence, more like institutional violence and more like property violence to achieve or defend said habitat, land from fossil fuel industries coming in and causing environmental destruction. And that is an opinion that I don't particularly agree with. I feel like when it comes to long-term substantial change, it must be fought peacefully and it must be fought legislatively. If, of course, this is by government, so it's not always set in stone. But at least in the United States, a legal grassroots battle, a local community, local power, and collective action has a lot of weight when it's not violent. And I believe that, and that shows particularly in the Apples of Apalachicola, the drilling on Apalachicola was something that was proposed by, I think, the chemical and oil and gas industry, and local actions that are peaceful or protesting, or even in other examples of like land development in Florida, protesting and peaceful protesting has a say. It works, and it killed the drill basically. The drill was killed, and we prevented developments from happening on protected lands or conservation lands in Florida. And that's a big thing. So I very much disagree with what violent actions. I mean, I don't fully disagree with it because unfortunately it's a government by government, institution by institution thing, and it's very difficult. I would support a property thing, but not entirely as a full means of a general first means option, of course. Now the next question though is, well, talk about legislatively. How do we do it? On a level that, what legislation do we take? What actions do we take as a overall government to handle that? As well. And then you look at it like, for example, like in Memphis, or look at oil production as well here in Florida as well. You look at the dynamics of those. Like, I want to take a real quick as well. Mentioning the example of the Memphis AI facilities that are producing so much chemicals in the air. Ammonia, methane gas rates in impoverished communities are also being affected as well. So that questions, again, about legislation. What legislation do you take to deal with these problems? And not the rational per se, but the most aggressive move would be to completely banish these things, completely ban these fossil fuel industries entirely. And to that argument, I would almost agree with you. Problem is that there are some industries, unfortunately, in the United States that have a lot of impact culturally in the communities through jobs or through just from history as well. I look at the oil and gas, the water and oil documentary about Louisiana's relationship with crawfishing and with oil production in the region through offshore drilling or from this Louisiana drilling. And it's a very different dynamic where you can't just ban altogether. You're going to put thousands of people out of a job, and also this industry, unfortunately, as well. As a government and as an energy industry, you can't just quickly dash these people off the side. You can't do that. You got to be proactive about it. You have to be sustainable about it. You got to make policy and law that will benefit everybody. You build policy to maintain and protect and conserve and to rehabilitate habitats that are being affected by oil and gas industry. You put harsher policies to ensure that environmental pollution is at a minimum, if not all entirely as well. Or you push the fossil fuel industries to move towards sustainable energy instead and move away from like wind power, solar energy power, something like that, or hydrogen fuel, whatever it is as well, away from oil as being the primary usage, just so that people could not only find a job in a different industry that is sustainable, but also be able to have another job to fall on, and that being crayfishing, crawfishing, or fishing in general. Again, and that goes back to Florida, where Florida, we have an amazing mussel, crab, fish industry here, and Florida did not have much of a history with oil drilling, so our communities didn't need to push for oil drilling. We saw what it had done before in the past with so many oil spills. We knew what dangers it could have because of a lack of environmental regulations, and because of that, that's why the drill was killed. Because the state of Florida didn't, well, people in Florida as mussel fishermen enjoy mussel fishing. They enjoy their job. They enjoy the work that they put in. They don't need fossil fuel jobs. They don't need a fossil fuel run area at all. They want to maintain the industry they already have because they're happy with it, and also because it provides thousands and millions of probably millions, billions of dollars in worth of industry that you put at risk of putting an oil rig down that could have an oil disaster or even oil leakage that could substantially destroy the mussel industry and put thousands of people out of a job. So I disagree with outright policy because I think it's something that is irrational, but I think it's a long-term goal to involve with that overall. So those are my overall opinions of the topics of entirely. I'm trying to make sure I went over everything as well. Um, yeah, yeah. So it's it's particularly effective, of course. Again with yeah. So I believe that's everything I have to say. Um, I hope this video is understandable. I hope it's good. Um, yeah, you have a great afternoon, whoever's watching this video, or good morning, or good evening. And I will hopefully see you around. So yeah, goodbye.